What's up guys, here's my deadlift exercise tier list video. Like with my squat video, I want to preface this by saying I don't think you can really objectively say that one exercise is better than another. That's why I hate most tier list videos. Each person is going to have different needs, and each person has exercises they may prefer doing and thus give more effort to, countering any so-called more optimal arguments. Hence why my criteria here is just going to be a bit different. It's going to be how widely I use them in my coaching, and thus how widely applicable I see them to be. First lift is going to be conventional, assuming you're a sumo deadlifter. So hip extensor loads don't really change much between sumo and conventional, despite what people say. The main difference is between them in terms of leg and spinal loading. Sumo works the legs more, conventional works the spinal extensors more. So conventional can be useful to train the spinal extensors. I do think there are less fatiguing options though, but still a solid one. I'm going to put conventional in B tier. Now let's do sumo, assuming you're a conventional puller. Like I said above, sumo is going to work your legs more versus conventional, but I'm assuming you're a powerlifter. You're already going to be training your legs enough with squats. While sumo can be a less taxing variation, I don't think it transfers over very well to conventional. You're better off doing more specific variations. So for that reason, I don't really see sumo as useful to do unless you pull sumo. I'm going to put sumo deadlifts in D tier. Next off is trap bar deadlifts. Now like with sumo, these turn it into a more quad dominant movement, and it's not really needed in either case as you're going to be working squats. They can be lighter on the back, just like sumo, but again, that's a pretty rare use case, and I think there's better options if you don't want to load your back as much to carry over to conventional or sumo. I just don't see these very useful, and I never really programmed them, so I'm going to go with F tier for this exercise. Now next off is pause deadlifts off the floor. I'm a big believer in starting positioning being the real key to a good deadlift. Most people's form issues come from not having a proper start position, so these are a great tool to work that. They also limit loading a bit, which can help as deadlifts are a fatiguing movement. These are a staple of my programming, and I think they're just simply an A tier exercise. Pauses at knee height are my next exercise. This is how I usually pause, but I don't think they're as applicable. They can be useful for people who tend to lock their knees too early, and I find pausing off the floor ruins my starting wedge. I'm too passive and I don't let the bar fly off the floor. I think that's more common than people realize, which is why I didn't put normal pauses in S tier. These are still not super applicable though. Most people are better off pausing off the floor, so I'm going to go with C tier for this exercise. Next up is deficit deadlifts. These have worked really well for me in the past, and with a few lifters I've coached who can handle lots of workload, but they're quite fatiguing, and deadlifts are quite fatiguing movement already, so I don't think they're that widely applicable. While the extra range of motion can have hypertrophy benefits, I do think there's less fatiguing ways to go about it. Overall, I'm going to put this exercise in D tier, save it for the people who can only handle lots of deadlift volume. Next is block pulls. These are often prescribed for working lockout, and I think they do a bad job at that. One, many people's lockout issues are due to bad start position, which block pulls are going to completely skip. And two, the position many people end up in on block pulls is often more upright than they would be on a normal deadlift at that height. Now, despite listing all these downsides, I still think block pulls are useful because it's a less fatiguing but specific variation, good for letting people handle more load on the deadlift. Overall, I'd put it in B tier. Next are Romanian and stiff-legged deadlifts. I'm doing them together because I programmed them for similar reasons. They practice a hinge that is bending purely at the hips with minimal spinal and knee flexion, a skill a lot of people lack. They also work the spinal and hip extensors quite well. I usually program one versus the other based on the range of motion somebody is able to maintain a good hinge through. People who can hinge for longer can go all the way to the floor, otherwise stick to Romanians. The only downside with these is they can load the back a lot, which for somebody who can't handle a lot of deadlift volume could be a downside. They'd be better off doing a more specific skill practice work for the volume they can handle. Either way though, these are a great exercise. I'm going with A tier. Now my last exercise is going to be slow eccentrics. I use them as a tool to teach start position. Slow eccentrics put you in a good one. The downside is you can't rely on an eccentric in a 1-rep max, so they only really work as an initial starting tool. They're also quite fatiguing, which deadlifts already can be, so I use them sparingly. I'm going to go with C tier. So that's basically it. My tier list of how often I use these exercises in my programming, as I think individual differences matter more in rating exercises, and there's no objectively better or worse movements. Anyways, please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and once again, thanks for watching.